Welcome back to another episode of the GMS Podcast, where we bring you insights into the maritime world and the forces shaping its future. I'm Jamie Dalzell, and today we're diving into a fascinating and timely topic: Europe's push to expand ship recycling capacity and the challenges it faces in practice. Joining me is Dr. Anand Heremath, Chief Sustainability Officer at GMS, and someone who has spent years researching and implementing safe and sustainable ship recycling practices worldwide. Dr. Anand, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Anand, let's start with the big picture. We've seen growing interest in Europe to establish large scale ship recycling facilities with the aim of producing green steel locally. On the surface, this sounds like a good idea. Ships recycled closer to home, with the recovered steel going straight into European industry. But your recent article suggests the reality is more complicated. Can you explain more about that?
Absolutely. The intention is good, more local recycling and reduce reliance on imports. But if you look at the data, the green steel, when we talk about, is the steel which is being manufactured by emitting minimum GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. A steel which has been manufactured by recycling ships is already contributing to a much more greener type of steel. Why? If you look at a scientific data, the steel manufactured by recycling of ships, for example, 1 ton of steel which has been manufactured or produced by recycling ship, contributes currently 0.44 ton of CO2 equivalent per ton of steel. If you compare the same steel, if generated from a conventional method, say from mining activities, its emissions per ton of steel manufacturing equals to 1.6 to 2.4 tons of CO2 equivalent. So where is 0.44 tons and where is 2.4 tons? So there's a huge gap when it comes to manufacturing steel from conventional process compared with the steel recycling. However, there were a lot of questions and debates about the quality of steel. We will keep that aside as of now. But if you look at the other data where Europe is saying that, okay, we want to have a green steel from recycling of ships, manufacturing it locally. In Europe, there is something called as European Union Ship Recycling Regulation, which everybody is well aware about. And as of now, there are about 44 odd ship recycling yards which have been approved in that list. And these yards, if you look at the theoretical or the value which they come up saying that their capacity cumulatively is about 2.5 to 3 million tons. But is there any realistic thing happening at the ground in the EU ship recycling approved yards, apart from the 8 yards which have been approved in Turkey? Because the yards which are located, say 30 plus yards within the Europe, they are predominantly doing ship repair or they are into a small scale shipbuilding activities. They haven't have a experience of recycling any large or a big type of ships. Most of them have not done so far. So though they are in the list from last 5 6 years, so it clearly says that you have a theoretical capacity, you have already have a ship recycling yards which are complied with European Union ship recycling regulation, but they lack somewhere the experience. They haven't done this activity before, and the question of green steel again remains, specifically in the Europe, a big question.
That brings us to regulations. Europe has its own ship recycling regulation, while globally we have the Hong Kong Convention, which just entered into force this year. Anand, how do these two frameworks compare?
Well, the Hong Kong Convention, what we usually call it as an HKC, is now the global standard because it's been ratified and globally it is in force from 26th of June 2025. What it requires is the HKC just do not apply only to the ship recycling. It covers an entire life cycle of a ship, right from shipbuilding, ship operations, ship maintenance, and the ship recycling. When it comes to shipbuilding, from the day the ship is being built, it must carry an inventory of hazardous materials on board a ship. So this is one of the requirement. It means that when a ship is built and it's ready to sail, at that time it is already having the inventory of what kind of hazardous material it is there on it is carrying on board. One more thing what we need to clearly observe is from year 2011, the amount of hazardous materials which are being installed on board a ship has reduced significantly. So as of now, no asbestos, no PCB, no TBT, anti-fouling. These all things, including cybertrine, which has been banned recently, these all things have been banned and which is already covered under the HKC. One more thing which we need to see is when a vessel comes for recycling, in the ship owner needs to submit this IHM, Inventory of Hazardous Material report, to the ship recycling yards, where the ship recycling yards prepare a proper ship recycling plan, that how and safely and environmentally they are going to recycle it as per the MEPC 196/62 guidelines, which again the HKC covers. The third and most important part is the readiness of the ship recycling yards. If you look at any of the IMO conventions which have been ratified in previous years, HKC is the only convention which has done a huge and a significant change before even it came into force. What I mean to say is, from the year 2050, if you look at an example of India, from the year 2015 itself, they were starting complying with the HKC standard. Initially, there were 4 yards. As on today, there are 110 plus ship recycling yards in India alone, and 17 ship recycling yards as on today in Bangladesh, which are compliant with HKC standards, where there is a huge investment made. If you look at these yards now, you won't be able to believe, because I keep on meeting people who have visited ship recycling yards back in the year 2010. And when the same people come back now in 2025 and look at the infrastructure, the kind of training, the kind of planning they are, is being in place, especially they're following the HKC compliance, there's a huge difference. On the other hand, the European regulation, the European Union Ship Recycling Regulation, as we know, it only recognizes the yards which they approve. There are about 44 yards. They do have some additional requirements where EUSRR talks about downstream waste management. It talks about zero contamination in the intertidal zone. It talks about build structures. And it also talks about two more hazardous waste, PFOS and HBCDD, which is not is part of an IHM as of now when it comes to HKC. But what we need to see here is the EUSRR is a kind of a regional regulation. Why I'm using the word regional? Because it's applicable to EU flagships, though it also insists non-EU flagships which comes to the European ports to follow the EUSRR and European Union waste shipment regulation. But if you look at the industry like EXA and BIMCO, they have been supporting the IMO's HKC very, very loudly and clearly. So somewhere the European Union ship recycling regulation success depends on how it aligns with HKC as of now, and over a period of time, how HKC can be amended to meet the USRR requirements.
One of the arguments for building European recycling yards is the idea of supplying green steel to local industries. Does the data support that vision?
Not really. Europe is already a major exporter of steel scrap. Over 17 million tons just last year, shipped mainly to Turkey, India, Egypt, UK, and to many other countries from Europe itself. In fact, recycling ships in Europe and then exporting the steel using the ships back to these countries. These countries, I mean, again, back to India, Egypt, UK, Africa, and many other places, Turkey, and all. It will add up the emissions. Why? Because you bring in a ship, you recycle the ship, you load the scrap steel back to the ship again, and again this ship will go to different countries, contributing to the additional cost and as well as to GHG emissions. So they the idea of green steel in an European world from the ship recycling is only theoretical, because practical data talks something different.
Meanwhile, South Asia has been recycling ships for decades. How does that experience compare to what's being proposed in Europe?
See, what we need to understand, ship recycling is not about just a ship recycling yard. There is a complete ecosystem which needs to revolve around the ship recycling yard. So there you need to have an waste management facility, you need to have a downstream people who will be able to buy the materials coming out from the ships. You need to have subcontractors, you need to have people, you need to have the entire circular economy model, which takes decades together to generate it. So when we talk about South Asian yards, they have not been formed over say 5 or 6 years. they have been in operation for a period of 40 plus years. So there is an ecosystem which is being there, which is practically operating from decades, which is a best example of circular economy. If you look at a ship, as on today, as the data says, more than 97% of the materials is either reused, recycled, refurbished. In India alone, in last 4 decades, 8,500 plus ships have been recycled. Do you know how much of steel this 8,500 ships have generated in India? Literally 67 million tons. Okay, we won't be able to imagine, but you might have seen an Eiffel Tower, right? With the 67 million tons of steel, we can literally build 9,700 Eiffel Towers. Imagine the level of secondary steel which this particular industry has generated. And if you equate that one with the greenhouse gas emissions, 67 million tons of recycled steel versus 67 million tons of steel generated from conventional mining process, you yourself will realize the amount of contribution ship recycling is currently doing in South Asian countries to minimize the GHG emissions. The kind of climate change mitigation measures this industry has done over a period of 4 decades is tremendous. But what is being missed is people are not trying to see this industry as with a complete picture. They are only struck with the yard infrastructure, what is happening in the beaching, but you need to look something beyond that, that how the material is being reused, recycled, and what value it is adding to the industry.
Let's also talk about costs and the environmental footprint. What happens if ships are diverted to Europe for recycling?
See, again, talking theoretically, say all the ships in the world now say that, okay, they have to be recycled in an European compliant yards. So, even currently, for example, we have a lot of case studies where a ship was very near to a ship recycling yard in India, Bangladesh, or Pakistan, where the ship owner was looking for an HKC compliant yard, but he was flying an European flag and he has no option other than going to an EUSRR approved ship recycling facility. If that particular ship owner or his ship is located, say, about 3,000 nautical miles away from the European Union ship recycling yard, say in Turkey or in Europe itself, it literally burn about 550 tons of fuel just to reach an USRR compliant yard. You know how much of emissions it will contribute? 1,700 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions just to reach an USRR yard if a vessel has to travel looking for an USRR compliant yard as on today. So that's what I was talking about. Somewhere we lost looking at the pictures in the Google where people are not wearing PPE, which have been there in the Google from last 10, 15 years. Repeatedly, it has been put in the mind of a people or the ship owners. The fear has been created that, okay, if you go to a beaching method, there is an headline risk. In my previous podcast, we talked about an XYZ vessel being recycled in an non-beaching yard, where we also saw this because of the lack of planning. There is an environmental contamination, and people have forced to come out and tell to stop this activity. So it means you're not supposed to look at what method the ship recycling country is being used, but you need to look at a particular ship recycling yard. We need to somewhere stop generalizing that, okay, beaching method is bad, this particular method itself should not be followed, but look at the real stories which are happening, which the ship owner is has gone to an yard which is non-beaching, but still end up facing challenges. So if the ship owner would have identified a right kind of shipyard in India, Bangladesh, or wherever it is, with a particular planning, with pre-audits, with pre-selection, then this kind of headline risk would have not come.
So, given these realities, what's the better path forward for Europe and the global maritime industry?
According to me and according to all the ship owners in the world, and also whoever are the experts in the ship recycling regulations, it's common sense that there must be one regulation to govern the ship recycling. If I have to go back a bit, say that initially there was a Basel Convention starting from 1992, which terribly failed to apply to ship recycling. And then Basel approached ILO to make its own guidelines, where ILO made in 2004 a guideline for ship recycling in India and Turkey. But that didn't work because it was just a guideline. When ILO and Basel both came to IMO saying that because you are governing the shipping, and ship recycling also to be governed by IMO, and IMO should come up with its own guideline. That's why in 2009 HKC was formed. IMO came up with HKC after the request from Basel and ILO. So somewhere we need to keep it in mind that now in 2025, people try to apply Basel Convention, people try to apply European Union ship recycling regulation as well as HKC. We cannot have three, four regulations for one ship. There has to be one regulation. And the regulation which is globally applicable currently is HKC because it's from IMO. IMO is governing the things, and everybody needs to agree with that HKC has to be the global convention for ship recycling. There might be some gaps, there might be some requirements from other ship owners or from the ship recycling country or from the ship owning country. HKC can always be updated, HKC can always be amended. So, real scenario and the practical scenario as of now is we need to come out of the Basel, HKC, USRR, and other guidelines application. Let's have HKC as a common, amend HKC as and when it is required to be amended. Because if you look at now, the ship owner wants to sell a ship, and if he is following HKC currently, he might be facing a challenge of breaching in Basel or Basel ban. So the ship owner will be in a difficult position following one regulation and not following the other regulation. So we have this challenge, and the best way forward is to accept HKC globally and amend the HKC as and when required.
As you know, most ship owners are concerned with how to track vessel recycling activities in order to avoid headline risk and ensure transparency. What are the different ways they can monitor these processes so that the information can also be used for ESG reporting?
The first thing what a ship owner will be able to do now is first they need to visit the ship recycling yards themselves, because when the ship recycling owners visit themselves or the owners team visit themselves, they will get to see the reality. So once they see the reality, what exactly is green ship recycling, HKC compliance, what infrastructure, what trainings, what documentation, what experience the yard has, then they will be able to shortlist the yards. In order to shortlist the yards, they themselves can come and do an audit as per HKC, or they can go with third party supervision teams like, SSORP, Sustainable Ship and Offshore Recycling Program. Or there are a lot of compliance monitoring teams which are there in the market. They can go with them and shortlist the yard. Yards out of 100 yards, they can shortlist 20 yards, 25 yards, depending on their ESG requirements as well. We have ship owners who are imposing their ESG requirements, talking about human rights, talking about anti-corruption, talking about supply chain issues, supplier code of conduct, UNGP, UNGC, United Nations Global Compact commitments, European Union human rights issues. These are all the additional requirements the ship owner comes up with, and they can do the audits themselves, or they can rely with the third parties who are experts in doing these audits. Once they do that, once they before they sell a vessel, they can take assistance for updating their items, part 1 to 3. There will be also an assistance for them in order to get an international ready for recycling certificate. Once the vessel comes to a ship recycling yard, for example, Sustainable Ship and Offshore Recycling Program, which is done by us, will be able to do a proper monitoring from the day the ship is there in the yard till the last piece of the ship's block is lifted from that yard. That there will be weekly report, continuous monitoring. A dedicated team will be placed. Even a ship owner can place his own team, and he can rely on third party as well. So these are the different ways which people are following currently, and there is a well established system right from day one, right from IHM to International Ready for Recycling certificates to ship recycling plans to weekly reports, monthly reports, ship owners visits, waste management tracking, video recording, photographic evidence. We have plenty of systems. We are end-to-end solutions providers in that. Ship owners currently are, more than 30 plus ship owners have approved us for as their auditors and as their supervising team. These are the different methods which ship owners, the new ship owners, can follow.
Anand, thank you for breaking that down. It's clear that while Europe's ambition to recycle ships locally comes from a good place, the data shows the most effective path is global cooperation under one standard.
Exactly. Ship recycling is already contributing to the circular economy on a larger scale, and aligning policies globally will make it safer, cleaner, and more efficient for everyone.
Well said. That's it for today's episode of the GMS Podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to subscribe and share it with colleagues in the maritime industry. Until next time, I'm Jamie, and thank you for listening.